Go live to the former Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, who joins me now. Barnaby Joyce, when did you know about these arrangements, and were you comfortable with what the former Prime Minister was doing there?
Well, I became aware of them subsequent to them being happened, and only on one instance, and that was with Keith Pitt, and it was pertinent to the discussions around Pell 11 and the political heat that was arising from that. It was a decision that was conveyed to me that the Prime Minister had the capacity. I believe he had told me that he'd been sworn to, that he'd sworn himself to that position. We had, and the Governor-General's got to swear. To be quite frank, I don't agree with it. It's totally within his rights to do that. There's no legal issue in doing that at all. Every minister is an appointment of the Prime Minister, and every actual ministerial staffer is technically a staffer of the Prime Minister. That's just the way it works. But on the premise of cabinet system of government, I fervently disagree with it. I believe that ministers should be solely responsible for their area because they would have the most acute knowledge of that area and things pertinent to that area, and you get confusion if you have two bosses. And ultimately, if a minister you think is not up to the job, well, there is a path for that, and that is their dismissal as a minister. That, you know, you sort of can't have it both ways. You can't say, I think you're up to the job, but I'm going to also do it as well. So, yeah, this is good, but I won't be lectured by Mr Albanese. Let's just go through one of his issues right at the start. You would remember at the start that he and Penny Wong were going to be Minister for Everything at the start of the Labor government, and that everybody else would get sworn in later. So he's not there all the way, but he's pretty close. But even better than that, he then told us all that he and Penny Wong were going overseas to the Quad. And actually, I had to bring it up publicly. I said, who's running Australia? You need an acting Prime Minister still in Australia. He'd been there for 26 years. He was about to fly off and leave Australia without a government.
But I guess the difference is that the Prime Minister was very upfront about it. He said, this is what we're doing. Your former Prime Minister wasn't. He didn't even tell Matthias Cormann that he was sworn in as Finance Minister.
Yeah, that's obviously that's an issue that for me to discuss because I'm not privy to the details and that are pertinent to that. But you know, I'm being straight, and people say, do you think it's right? No, it's not right. You should have a cabinet system of government, and people should be solely responsible for their cabinet positions. He was aware, Mr Morrison, that you actually had to have a Prime Minister or acting Prime Minister in Australia, which apparently Mr Albanese was not aware of. He literally was about to leave Australia without a government, and he'd been here for 26 years. It was absolutely astounding. Yeah, if you... what else can you say? I think that it's important that cabinet ministers, because they're aware of the issues, they're getting briefed all the time, have responsibility and sole responsibility. If you have two forms of responsibility, you just won't be across the details like the cabinet minister is. And they're aware of the legalities of their issues because, you know, stick to your own knitting and you probably make yourself a jumper, won't you?
Was that all about that you touched on it earlier, that PEP 11 project? Is that why Scott Morrison did this, because he disagreed with your colleague Keith Pitt?
Well, I think, you know, I think that's before the court, isn't it? So I'm going to be really careful what I say there and leave it with them. You know, once more, it was always going to be contentious, and contention requires someone who's got total focus on that issue.
You, obviously, I know that you've gone into bat for the Nationals lots of times in terms of the coalition agreement and so on. If you've got a Prime Minister doing this sort of stuff as well, taking on various roles, doesn't that diminish the coalition agreement where you've got, OK, we've got resources, we've got this, we've got that. If you've got a Prime Minister saying, well, I'm also going to be Minister for so-and-so, doesn't that diminish the coalition agreement?
It does, but you've got to remember I didn't get to do a coalition agreement. A coalition agreement is done immediately after an election. So, so my agreement with the Prime Minister was a subsequent agreement, and so there was no coalition agreement for him to break with me because he didn't need a coalition agreement with me. He was already the government, and I was hardly going to suggest that we break the government up and go to an election immediately. That would have been patently absurd. So yes, you where there should be in a coalition between the Nationals and the Liberals, defined areas that are absolutely without equivocation your bailiwick. But you can't hold somebody to an agreement when there's no agreement between myself and Scott Morrison. That is a coalition agreement. Such a document did not exist.
So it sounds like you would have
won.
It sounds like you would have pushed back. It sounds like you would have pushed back if he had put.
I don't think I was pushed back too much. We ended up with a whole range of other things. A new minister in Keith Pett. We had a new person on expenditure review committee in Bridget McKenzie. We carved out in excess of a $21 billion deal later on. I think we did more than enough. Held all our seats, and even for myself, increased my margin.
Yep. And okay, well, I'll just ask you one more on this before we move on, because there is something else I want to touch on. But Mr Albanese says that this is trashing the Westminster system, the approach of Scott Morrison's government. What do you say to that?
I think that's at Mr Albanese theatre. Good luck to him. I mean, that's what he would say. I think Mr Albanese should realise that he started off with he was about to leave Australia without a government. And he'd been in the place for 26 years. He was about to take the only two sworn ministers, himself and Penny Wong, fly overseas, and he didn't realise he actually had to have someone running Australia in Australia. So let's not take too many lectures from Mr Albanese. And you'll notice Mr Albanese very recently has become very arrogant. You watch him at the dispatch box, flicking people away. It didn't take long for the boy from Balmain to become the creature of Canberra.
Now, I know you've got to get on a plane, but quickly, you've been focusing on the impact of the Northern Rivers floods on agriculture. What can you tell us this afternoon? Yeah. I know a number of those specific areas, like cane farmers, are really in a world of hurt. Can you explain to our viewers what's happening there?
Well, a lot of cane farmers, which is a fundamental part of that economy, have, and I know that Kevin Hogan, I've been on the phone to him this afternoon, has been working incredibly hard at this. They've been tied up in this mad bureaucracy where people from government departments turn up and say, oh, there might be the potential, there might be the potential of fish going into that area, so you can't touch it, can't work with it. And I said, well, there's never been fish there. What are you talking about? And I said, the potential of a guppy, guppy getting in there, so you're not allowed to basically look after that field. They've got drains that were put in by the government, last cleaned in 1996. Where just for one drain, $7,000, and then they have to get an environmental impact study for $10,000. The actual cost of doing it themselves is about a couple of $100. And there's a sense over there, they said, well, you're trying to close the cane industry down in the Northern Rivers. Is this where it's going? Are we going to yet again go into Australia, find another industry and close it down? 30% of your white sugar comes from northern New South Wales. Like the export sugar, obviously most of it's going out from Queensland. But this is yet going to the fabric of an area that's been devastated by a flood, the economic fabric, and coming up with bureaucratic ways to put people out of a job. These are good people. They've been there for donkey's years. You go right back to, I suppose, to 1900 or thereabouts, where the industry started down Harwood. And
so what
these people be put under the pump by green bureaucrats.
Very simple terms, what do they need from the federal government then to help them rebuild?
Well, they need predominantly from the state government for the state bureaucrats to be reasonable, get rid of the costs and get rid of these ridiculous laws which says, oh, well, outside Parliament House in Canberra is a drain. And I don't know, we might get a salamander growing up there so you're not allowed to drive home at night.
Former Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, I know you've got to get to the airport. Thanks for your time. Speak to you soon.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.